Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Nice to see you all. Today we're going to talk about whether or not it makes sense to study a language at university. Now, as you're all aware, the internet has changed language learning hugely. Anyone with broadband internet in this day and age can study virtually any language at all, assuming that resources actually exist for it. Things are very different now to the way they were back in the mid-1990s, which is when I started learning Japanese at university. Learning a language then, especially an exotic language like Japanese, was a very different proposition. Today things are completely different, of course. So for that reason, I think it might be interesting to have a look at this question as to whether or not it's worth studying a language at university at all. I just have to clarify a couple of things before we get stuck into this. I'm not talking about studying French or Spanish or German or something like that at university. I don't know how this works in any other country, but in Britain, if you want to study a language like that at university, you already have to have studied it at school to a certain level. I also want to clarify that I'm not talking about people doing, for example, classics at university. I'm not talking about Latin, I'm not talking about ancient Greek, I'm not talking about any other ancient language that only really exists today in written form. The question I'm posing here is it worth studying a relatively exotic language of the sort that you would be able to study from scratch at university? I'm talking about Japanese, I'm talking about Chinese, I'm talking about Korean perhaps, talking about Arabic, talking about potentially Russian, and maybe, depending on the university you want to go to, something like Farsi or Swahili. I'm talking about these languages where you would be doing a 4-year degree on the whole, in Britain at least, and studying from scratch. So we're focusing on real, complete language learning, where people would be learning the spoken form of the language and also the written form of the language. Learning Latin, learning Greek, don't have any problem with it if that's your bag, but it's something actually very different to what I'm talking about, and I just wanted to make that clear. Now, I'm sure that you'll find, certainly online, you'll find many people who will just say straight off the bat, no, it's not worth it. All you need is Anki, YouTube, Immersion, italki. That's all you need. You don't have any reason to spend 4 years studying Japanese at university, or Chinese or Arabic or whatever. Well, okay, let's go back a bit and ask ourselves what sort of person we're talking about. The type of person that I'm directing this to predominantly is the type of person who, for better or for worse, for whatever reason, has already decided, or had it decided for them by their parents, that they are going to university one way or the other anyway. For better or for worse, there's a big dividing line in many societies, perhaps most societies, perhaps all societies, between people who do have a university degree and people who don't have a university degree. If you've decided that you want to be on a certain side of that line, if you've decided that you do want to have a university degree, then is it worth studying a language from scratch at university? If that's the question and that's your situation, then I would say that choosing to study the language you're interested in, whatever it may be, could be a very strong and sensible move. Remember that when we talk about studying a language like Japanese at university, in actual fact, you can't just study a language, not as far as I'm aware. What I studied at university was not Japanese, it was Japanese studies. You have to study a lot of Japanese. You also study Japanese culture, Japanese history, perhaps the Japanese economy. As you move into your 3rd and 4th years, you'll be able to choose your own modules, choose your own courses. But it's important to bear in mind that you're actually doing a degree in the humanities / social sciences that happens to have a large linguistic component. You're not just studying the language, right? University departments are not dedicated language schools. Even those of them that teach languages don't purely and only teach languages, right? Remember that. Don't kid yourself that you're just going to language school. That would be a bad mistake. You're not going to be studying your target language the whole time. You're basically doing a humanities degree, like I said, with a large linguistic component. So when you come out, when you get your degree, assuming that you studied reasonably hard along the way, you're going to have a decent humanities degree, a degree in the humanities, plus whatever language skills you happen to pick up along the way. Now, I confess that I don't have any facts or figures to hand, but I believe quite strongly, and I would be surprised if this didn't turn out to be the case, I believe quite strongly that Japanese studies, Chinese studies, Korean studies, all of these degree courses are quite well respected by employers. They're quite well respected and they provide a perfectly healthy degree of employability, let's say, on the other side of your course. If you want to go into banking, if you want to go into journalism, if you want to work for an NGO, then none of these degrees are going to be any sort of handicap at all. There might be degrees that, statistically speaking, offer more employability. But like I said, I think these are perfectly respectable degree choices in that regard. Now, of course, many people who are thinking of doing Arabic studies or something like that at university will have quite different aspirations. They're not just looking to get a degree, they'll have some sort of relatively strong attachment to their target culture and language, and they will probably be considering the possibility of making that language and that culture the center of their future professional life. If you happen to be that sort of person, then of course it makes sense to study the language/culture in question at university. If you're fascinated by China, if you want to study Chinese, if you want to get good at Chinese, if you think you might want to live and work in China in the future, then doing Chinese studies, or perhaps Chinese studies in something else, Chinese in business, whatever you like, making that decision is pretty much going to be a no-brainer. The mistake that people probably make here to a greater or lesser extent is the mistake of thinking that if you do a 4-year degree in Chinese studies, then that degree constitutes some sort of conveyor belt that's basically going to spit you out at the end of the degree with a pretty respectable level of ability in your target language, be it Arabic, Korean, Chinese, whatever you like. That would be a terrible misunderstanding, and it's very important that you don't make that mistake. Languages, when you're studying them at university, are taught in a specific way, and that specific way of teaching languages is rooted in what universities really are all about. Fundamentally, they're about research. Yes, they're also about teaching, but they're not going to teach you to sing your favorite Japanese song in Japanese. That's not the kind of thing that they want to teach you. They want to teach you the type of Japanese that is fundamental to doing original academic research on and in and pertaining to Japan. And what that means overwhelmingly and most importantly is that they want to teach you how to read Japanese. They're not that interested in how well you can speak it. That may be a component of what you do, but it's not the most important component. Not at a university. If you're lucky, you'll get 2 or 3 conversation classes a week. I mean, that's what I had when I was studying Japanese at Sheffield many years ago. I think it was maybe 3 in the first year and then 2 after that. Let's say 2 for the sake of argument. 2 conversation classes a week. If you get 2 conversation classes a week, 30 weeks a year for 4 years, then what you're talking about is 240 hours of exposure to the spoken form of the language over a period of 4 years. That is basically sod all, I promise you. And remember that you'll be sharing those classes with a number of other students. It's not like each hour is an hour where you and only you are practicing the language. So your speaking time will be relatively minimal, all right? As will the amount of time available to you to ask questions, to clarify things that you don't understand, etc., etc. Let's be generous and say that 240 hours of conversation classes at university is equivalent to 100 hours of dedicated, concentrated, one-on-one conversational tuition. That is nowhere near enough to get any good really at any language. Even if you were studying Spanish or French or a language much more closely related to English, 100 hours, you can't get good at any language like that. You certainly can't get to be any good at Arabic or Korean or Japanese or Russian, to be honest. And I know because I can speak Russian pretty well, and 100 hours won't cut it. And that's before we even get to talking about listening comprehension. Listening comprehension and developing your listening comprehension, this is a fundamental problem in all language learning. You know, it takes hundreds of hours of practice. I can't put a figure to it, but hundreds of hours of practice to really make a dent in learning to understand the spoken form of your target language. Even if your general understanding of your target language is quite good on paper in terms of the grammar and the lexicon, you have to understand that you're talking about hundreds of hours of dedicated listening practice to really achieve some respectable level of ability in listening. You know, maybe you're getting into the low thousands. It really is terribly hard, terribly difficult. Of course, if you are trying to have conversations in your target language, then you will naturally be getting a certain amount of listening practice because the person you're talking to will talk back to you. But really, to get good at this, you need to invest a lot of time and energy in watching and listening to anything you can get your hands on. Whatever, TV programs, films, podcasts. Personally, I don't think that music is very helpful, but some people would disagree. Whatever it is, you've got to be trying to listen to as much of it as possible for hundreds of hours. What I'm getting at is the unfortunate truth that if you want to come out of your degree with a genuinely strong level of ability in the spoken form of the language, and that includes listening, not much point speaking if you can't understand what anyone says to you, right? If you want to develop that kind of skill set by the time you finish your degree, you've got to go a long way beyond the call of duty. It's not going to happen automatically. It's not going to happen because you do all of the homework your professors give you. It's not going to happen like that. It's almost a separate endeavor. You have to do it yourself. And there's a hell of a big difference between the people who make that effort and the people who don't. It's not really the responsibility of your university to help you try and solve this problem. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, it's just not possible. It comes down to you.